But it's also a very, very loaded word. It was also very conscientiously decided to be part of the name OpenDaylight, right? Because openness is key. But what is it? It causes a lot of hand-wringing. And I think in the networking industry especially, probably nothing jangles the architectural senses more than the word open, just because it is so loaded. So what do you really mean by open? I'd say that open is not a discrete element of value by itself. It's actually an environmental description, a little bit like freedom. So freedom can be many things. Individually, you can argue the merit of individual elements of it, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, whatever you want to say. But collectively, what they present is freedom, which is a better alternative to tyranny, right? And so we have the same thing with openness. Openness is many things, but collectively, they're better than the former alternative. So if you break that down, 3 fundamental things that I see in openness, which actually have very thematic strengths and comparisons to freedom. First, open standards. What is this? This is just democracy in action, right? It's a community of people coming together and saying, this is what we expect as an output, or expect as an outcome. And it doesn't change the end result, but it does ensure everybody's on the same starting line, right? Then we've got open systems. This is the decoupling of hardware from software, which the compute world is already way down the line on that. In networking, we're doing this for the first time. We're decoupling that. What does that do? Well, it produces innovation at a much faster pace at the software layer and at the hardware layer. It gives customers choice. They can begin to innovate faster, makes the market more efficient. It's a good thing. And then we have open source, and this is where we are today, right? So open source has multiple benefits. There is just the global licensing model, which gives customers the ability to kind of move the fulcrum in the lever of the push-pull between them and the vendor and give them more control over their outcome. There is peer review of the open source development cycle, and peer review is tremendously beneficial, right? Not only does it produce good code faster, there are even some that would argue that it actually creates more secure code because you're not hiding behind the unknown. And then ultimately, with open source, there's the pace of innovation. And this is the sub-theme that I just want to drive through here. The pace of innovation is changing. Open and the pace of innovation are fraternal twins. And I think that we're on the front end of this with OpenDaylight, just the front end of it. So with that in mind, from that November meeting, we come out to April 2013, OpenDaylight launches, and if you were part of the project in any way, shape, or form at the time, then you know that the prevailing winds of opinion in the public eye were not at our back, right? And some of you can chuckle at that because you know how true it is. There were a lot of naysayers, and there were a lot of reasons for the naysayers, but generally I thought they lumped into 3 categories. Some people say, oh, this is some insidious plot by a bunch of vendors to come together and squelch the innovation from SDN startups. Or there were others that said, you know, at the surface area of what you're describing, the problem statement is too big. It's inconceivable that you'll ever even succeed. And then there are other cynics that just said, don't even worry about it. Anytime a bunch of vendors get together, nothing constructive happens anyway, right? And you can surf around, you can find blogs or articles that were specifically calling out these issues. But just with any balance in life, along with naysayers, there were optimists, and I count myself among them. And the optimists had some countervailing opinions. One of them was, first of all, yes, a bunch of vendors did come together to initiate this, but don't get too far over our skis here. The fact of the matter is a bunch of vendors had to get together to initiate this because the purview of SDN is so broad. You're talking about everything from layer 0 to layer 7. That's a lot of products. And then you're talking about a vendor heterogeneous network. What one vendor is going to go out and create a product that can cover 0 through 7 and then in a vendor heterogeneous support model? They're not going to. We had to come together to be able to unleash the wave of innovation and compete on a different basis. So we said we had to do that, and not only that, once we come together, don't worry about the first vendors being involved and the first origins of the code coming together. Don't worry about that. That is going to give way to a culture of community as more and more developers come together. They'll work shoulder to shoulder to advance the status of the code, and we have good governance. So community behavior will come, and watch for the code velocity. This is the thing. Watch for the code velocity. Don't look at that first batch of contributed code. Think about what happens when that first batch of contributed code in only 12 months gets something like 50 man-years behind it. And then a year after that gets a 50 to 100 more man-years behind it. Watch the pace of change, because the pace is the thing. And we're on the very front end of the pace of change of this. So when you look at speed of innovation, generally it's assumed that software can go faster than hardware in terms of pace of innovation. But even within software, you need to look at two different models, proprietary development model and the open source development model. And while there are always exceptions, in general, what I see with the proprietary software model is that its pace of change actually comes out of the gate really fast. And then it begins to temper a bit over time. Again, there's always exceptions, but this is in general what I think the industry has seen. And there's good reason for this, because one, it's a vendor. They have all the resources, they have the plan, and they've got managerial control over it, and they go. So they start to produce a lot of value really quickly, but then over time, maybe for a lot of different reasons. One is certainly you have finite resource working on it. That's definitely a limiter. Second, maybe it's not modular enough. Maybe maybe agile approaches aren't being used, or maybe the tool sets are aging. One way or the other, some entropy tends to set in to the advancement of the code base. Now, open source is just about the opposite of that. It starts slowly at first, and then it picks up pace. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Why does it start slowly at first? Well, first, you don't have a lot of developers working on it. You're building the developer base over time. Second, the focus, the community focus and the governance and the norming of the developer group are still coming together. So once a little bit of time has passed, people are more collective in understanding in terms of what they're driving toward. So this tends to happen when, and only when, there's a thriving developer community. And I think a really good example of this, possibly the best example on the planet of this, would be the Linux kernel. So I remember seeing an analysis in 2002 that measured the pace of advancement of the Linux kernel as a function of the commits. And in 2002, year on year, the kernel was still increasing in its pace of advancement. It was already 11 years old. So when you really get a thriving community, you can drive a real fast pace of change. And this is something that is new to the networking industry. And we're only on the cusp of it right now with ODL. And there are obviously other important projects as well that are going to be proving this out as well. So the pace of change, the reason the pace of change is important, we close the doors here, we have a few hundred people here that get it, but talking about the entire universe of the industry that hasn't wrapped their heads around this yet, this pace of change really throws them. Whenever you take a large community or an industry that is inured for decades to a certain pace of change, and then you inject into that something that looks like it's turbocharged, it produces this interesting dissonance in the marketplace. And the word that actually Alvin Toffler coined in a book in 1970 was future shock. And he called future shock the dizzying disorientation that accompanies the premature arrival of the future, right? Which, I didn't expect it to happen that fast. This is like me explaining to my father why you can actually watch TV on the internet. He doesn't want to deal with it, right? But people struggle with this, and industries struggle with this. So when we came out just a couple of years ago and said, here's this project, and it's going to create an open source community-driven SDN controller, and the naysayers had all their reason for saying it wasn't going to work, and then 2 years later, AT&T comes out and says, yeah, we're in production, it's our global controller. And this is one of the largest organizations in one of the slowest moving industries on the planet. It's shocking people, and they're trying to get their head around this. But it's exciting, at the same time. So the question is, how do you go from something that is still, I think we're honest with each other as the relative maturity of ODL, and any open source community is brutally honest with itself. We're making great progress. There's a lot of work to do. We're making great progress. So how do you go from something that relatively new to actually getting consumed, to actually getting adopted? Because at the end of the day, if we don't get adopted, we just go home, right? The industry has to change. We need this adopted. What causes that? Well, it's described really well by Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma. A smart guy from Harvard. and wrote a lot of things, but in the Innovator's Dilemma, which was talked about really disruption theory, and it's really built on a lot of different things, technology S-curves and learning curves from organizations and even economic demand curves and stuff. But he did us all a favor by simplifying it down to this single picture. He said, look, all technology over time gets better. Okay, I think we can all agree on that. And he said the main point that he made is that as a technology gets better over time, this was the awareness. Even though technologies get better, customers can't necessarily adopt them at the same pace that the technologies advance. Okay? And a technology will start at the bottom, and it'll get better and better, and as it does, the customer keeps upgrading because they're finally getting to the point of saturation of what they actually need from a technology. But at some point, the technology keeps going faster than the customer can upgrade. When's the last time any of us voluntarily upgraded Word? It just oversatisfies. You get to this point of oversatisfaction. And when you do, when that scenario is reached, that's when a new technology can come into being, not before. Because there's no demand for it, because the existing market's still trying to catch up on, trying to get the existing product or existing technologies to match the requirements. But once you're over-satisfying, a new technology can come in. And T2 is over here, and guess what? Just like any technology, it's gonna start down at the bottom. And it'll start to climb. And this is the innovator's dilemma and the struggle that Christensen noted. He said, if you're the dot on T1, if you're that vendor or that industry, and you're looking down at the beginning dot at T2, you're kind of thumbing your nose at it and saying, boy, that thing's not very good. That's got a long way to go before it ever catches me. But it doesn't. It just has to catch the customer. Right? It's a little bit like the old joke of the two hikers that are out, and bear starts chasing them. And one of them stops, and he starts taking out his running shoes and putting them on, and the other guy says, what are you doing? We got to get away from this bear. And the other guy says, no, I just got to get away from you. Just got to outrun the right target. And so the other thing that Christensen noted is that typically when you go from one of these technology models to another, is that what started off as a very monolithic kind of vendor-centric design tends to decouple into a modular design, which is certainly what we're seeing, the decoupling of systems right now, right? And the final point is that, and this describes why, within a very, very short period of time, large organizations are now starting to move aggressively into this space, is because they're not measuring the technology by the same factors that they were measuring the former technology. They're trying to achieve something new. They're trying to achieve something different. So the parameters of demand change. They're willing to accept something that's still working through its maturation cycle. They're going to keep consuming it until it does reach its maturation cycle, and that takes time. But the cat's out of the bag, the game has changed. And so this is why we're finding really aggressive companies of such size and import suddenly making this otherwise, to the outside world, what would look like an irrational move. But it's not irrational. It's incredibly rational. So, what the thing that strikes me as probably most compelling of all of this is just the way that software has kind of stolen the mantle in a traditionally hardware-centric world. We still need hardware, love hardware, have to have it. But we never talked about software, and now software centrism is kind of this new normal that we're talking about. It could be ODL, it could be certain protocols, it could be OP and FV. We're talking software. We're constantly talking software. So from a hardware-centric world, the industries kind of have to pass through this looking glass and get to the other side to a software-centric world. And the future of success, I don't care if you're a vendor, or if you're a customer, or if you're a global system integrator or a channel partner, the future of success really depends on getting through that looking glass and starting to get software centrism as the center thematic for the next years going forward. Because this isn't just the tip of the iceberg. What we're seeing right now is just the tip. The groundswell is still building. Look at Massachusetts Open Cloud. Massachusetts Open Cloud, kicked off by Boston University, a whole bunch of really good schools behind it. An open cloud exchange as kind of an alternative to traditional private clouds. There is going to be a tremendous amount of research, a tremendous amount of comp sci grads working in here, creating new apps, proving out concepts. They're going to be doing a lot of work in this space. Very, very exciting stuff. OpenDaylight, right in the middle of it. So, you talk about the groundswell moving, the people coming out of school are going to be fully inured to these concepts as well, and those are going to be in the hiring pool coming forward. So the groundswell is really picking up. By the way, CERN just announced also that they are moving OpenDaylight into the CERN Open Lab because they need to get into advanced SDN to be able to handle the big data problem that the Large Hadron Collider is presenting them. So a tremendous amount, actually, of achievement in a very, very short period of time, and a lot of achievement when a lot of people thought, it's probably not going to amount to much. But it has. And for the community members, you should be very, very proud of the impact, the global impact that you're having on the industry. So the question now, to me, is what do the next couple of years bring? And I actually own a crystal ball. My uncle was a crystal dealer. I have a crystal ball. I keep it in my house. It rarely works. But I'll dust it off here anyway. What I think is going to happen is this, that in the short period of time that ODL has come into the industry, as an industry, we're used to looking down at the box, and we're used to thinking about the logic in the box, and we focused on that thing. So here comes ODL above it, and we're staring at it and scratching our heads, and wondering kind of, what is this thing? How do I understand what it is? The technology is complex. How do I'm trying to get my head around this. What I think is going to happen in the next 2 years is that the gaze is going to shift upward, right? And we're going to start seeing the industry really focusing on what it can do, not how it does it. Not going to be focusing so much, the industry, we're not going to be focusing so much on how the sausage is made, but rather what can we make with that ingredient. What new applications can I create to further my objectives in the industry? And that's going to create a burgeoning developer pool for applications. It's going to create new professional services organizations. It's going to create new education curriculums. But people are going to be looking north. And when they do that, what they're going to be inadvertently doing is they're going to be inadvertently taking ODL for granted. And believe it or not, that's a good thing, right? Because they're not going to be worrying about whether or not it can chin and bar. They're going to be saying, yeah, okay, I know it's there. And I know the technology is getting better. What can I build on it? Now, the ODL community is not going to be so sanguine, right? They're going to be working very, very hard to continue advancing the product. Some of it is going to be innovative, and some of it's going to be fixing what I call the family of illities, right? Scalability, reliability, serviceability, that sort of thing, which I think that actually you see evidence of that in what's being planned for Beryllium already. So that's the first thing that I think is going to happen, is increasing focus on the apps above. And the second thing, which is a little fuzzier, is I believe in the next 2 years, you're going to see that logic in the box start to relocate in certain ways and find its way as an app. It's not going to be a one-for-one technology relocation, but I think that what's going to happen, and I've already seen 2 examples of this, where customers are looking to see how can they actually, instead of continuing to buy the same thing that they had been buying, in one case, a large purchase of another bunch of big routers was coming up. They said, wait a minute, if I could create this application, I could actually divert the need to run certain things through the router. I could handle the logical flow of the traffic differently. And not only does it give them a different way to do it, but the customer thought, hey, this puts me on a path to white box over time, right? Because now my logic is up here, and now I've got very effective software down here. So time will tell. We'll see if the crystal ball had any acuity to it. But in essence, there's going to be a lot of creative destruction going on in the industry, and it's going to be because of the existence of ODL. So I'm going to leave you with this. Come up. All right, it's not going to work. So I will.
We came across the name of vernal equinox. Well, you could have knocked us down with a feather, because we both knew Vernal as a little kid, and to tell you the truth, we never thought he'd amount to much.
Sorry that didn't come across, but we've got the solar theme of ODL, and I was thinking what else might be a solar theme where you didn't expect it to amount to much, and apparently the vernal equinox was one of those. So on behalf of vernals all over the world, I'd like to thank the ODL community for all of the work that we've done. We're changing the world. It is a really exciting time, and it's just great to see the community developing. Thank you.